How'd you known as Captain Hoff within Silicon Valley?
Well, that was my gamer handle. Since
Oh.
I started, I love games too, by the way. I'm a huge gamer. So in addition to making like 50 movies when I was younger, I also made hundreds of games. So the idea of combining interactive entertainment, I thought at that time, Hollywood was way bigger than the game industry, but I was like, it's just a matter of time before games are bigger than Hollywood. And sure enough, it happened.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It was so funny because when I first saw the nickname Captain Hoff, I just assumed that it had to do something with like sailing or you had a boat.
Most people assume that. Well, now, since I'm the captain of Founderspace, a startup accelerator, I'm the captain of the team.
You're listening to the Bacon Bits and Bytes podcast, and I'm your host, Karen Swizik. This is the podcast where a bit of business and a bite of technology come together.
Steve Hoffman, or Captain Hoff, as he's called in Silicon Valley, is the chairman and CEO of Founderspace, one of the world's leading incubators and accelerators. He's also an angel investor, limited partner in August Capital, serial entrepreneur, and author of several award-winning books. These include Make Elephants Fly, published by Hachette, and Surviving a Startup, published by HarperCollins. Hoffman was the founder and chairman of the Producers Guild Silicon Valley chapter, Board of Governors of the New Media Council, and founding member of the Academy of Television's Interactive Media Group. Welcome to another episode of the Bacon Bits and Bytes podcast. And today on the show, I have the pleasure of chatting with Steve Hoffman, or Captain Hoff, as he's called in Silicon Valley.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I understand that you're the chairman and CEO of Founderspace, one of the world's leading incubators and accelerators. So before we get into that, I was looking at your bio online, and what really struck me was that it mentioned you were always innovating on your life. And I don't have the same career path as you do, but I can definitely relate into constantly pivoting in your career, having so many different jobs, as you said, like more lives than cats have.
Yes, I have done that. I have always been open to change, and I actually find it very exciting to switch jobs and to try new things.
So do you consider yourself as someone who tends to get bored easily, and then that moment you feel, okay, I need a change, you immediately act upon it?
I like challenges. So I don't like routine. If I'm doing the same thing over and over and over, it gets very boring for me. So I have to change after a certain period of time. Once I figured something out and know it really well, then I'm always looking for the next thing.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to being like a serial entrepreneur, capitalist, and angel investor, you're also a voice actor, Hollywood TV exec, and game designer. Could you walk us through how you got to where you are today?
Well, it was a long and meandering path, but I can give you a short summary. So I began actually when I was young making movies. I made over 50 movies by the time I graduated high school. Now, these movies ranged from 15 minutes to over an hour. So some of them were quite a production. And my dream was to go to film school. But my father is a rocket scientist from MIT. And he said, son, you have to study computers. They're the future. So I listened to him. I got my degree from University of California in electrical computer engineering. But as soon as I graduated, I decided to go to film school. So I went off to Hollywood. I got accepted to USC, University of Southern California's film and television program. I got my master's degree there. After that, I went out into Hollywood to work. I actually had no connections. I had to basically reach out and contact. I got the contact information for the top 150 people in Hollywood at the time. And I reached out to all of them.
Oh, wow.
Only 3 replied to me. So the first one that replied was the producer of the Star Wars film, Empire Strikes Back. And he called me up And the first thing he said is, I don't have a job, but I really liked your letter. And so we just chatted for like 45 minutes, a fun conversation. And that was that. The second one that called back was the head of production at Disney. And I actually got invited in for a job. So this would have been a dream job. And I went in there, the interview was going great. I thought I'd nailed it. I have. And then they asked me a tough question. The question was, do you watch Disney movies? And I was always honest. So I said, I watched those movies when I was a kid, but I don't really watch them that much anymore. And then the person looked at me and said, well, what movies do you watch? And since I'd been in film school, I've been seeing all these amazing artistic films by these incredible directors. So I started to rattle them off. And then she goes, these aren't Disney movies. These they're not even close to Disney movies. Her whole expression changed. The interview was over. She basically ended the interview right after that. And I did not get the job. So much for honesty. The next chance I got was one of the top TV producers at the time. He produced lots of TV movies and feature films and TV series. His name was Chuck Freeze. He was right across from the Man Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. He brought me in and he offered me the glorious job of being a reader. And a reader is the lowest position on the rung for a creative person. Basically, you read the scripts so that the producers and executives don't have to read them. You basically filter out the bad stuff. And then you pick the ones that they should spend their time reading. So and it pays almost nothing. You can't even live off of it. But this was my entry into Hollywood, and I worked really hard and I rose up the ladder really fast. Within a year, I was a development executive. I was doing all this stuff and I was figuring it all out. But what I wasn't doing was I was doing the business side of Hollywood, but I wasn't doing the creative side. And that's why I'd gone to film school. And so I was really frustrated. And so at a certain point, I did, I want to be creative. I'm not doing it in this job. And I had met the founder of one of the largest game companies at that time. It was Sega. And they had just passed up Nintendo. And he invited me to come to their Japan headquarters and dream up whatever ideas I wanted for new games. So I flew off to Japan. I quit my job, flew off to Japan, designed games at Sega. After I stayed there a year too. And after a year, I again felt like I want to start my own game company now. I don't want to just make these games for Sega. I want to do my own thing. So I quit that job. I moved back to California. I moved to Silicon Valley and started my first startup, which was a game company. And that put me down the path of doing startups. And I was doing entertainment. Very exciting. We released a whole bunch of games that were very successful. And that one thing led to another. And the next startup I did was venture funded, and we just kept going from there.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So I'm curious to know, and this is probably a question that you get asked quite often in interviews. How did you get to be known as Captain Hoff within Silicon Valley?
Well, that was my gamer handle. Since I started. I love games too, by the way. I'm a huge gamer. So in addition to making like 50 movies when I was younger, I also made hundreds of games. So the idea of combining interactive entertainment, I thought at that time, Hollywood was way bigger than the game industry, but I was like, it's just a matter of time before games are bigger than Hollywood. And sure enough, it happened.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It was so funny because when I first saw the nickname Captain Hoff, I just assumed that it had to do something with like sailing or you had a boat.
Most people assume that. Well, now, since I'm the captain of Founderspace, a startup accelerator, I'm the captain.
So Founderspace currently has over 50 partners in 22 companies and has become the world's leading startup innovation hub. I'm curious to know, what was it like in the early days when you were first building it?
So in the early days, we started here in San Francisco where I live. And I actually started just going out to friends because I'd done 3 venture funded startups and I was having coffee with various friends and they were starting their companies and they were like, Steve, tell me, how did you how did you do this? How did you raise money? How do you pitch investors? Can you help me put together my investor deck? So I started doing it just for fun on the side as I was working. And then it just kind of blossomed. It started to take off. And we started to do these roundtables, which we called Founder Space Roundtables. I had my blog called Founder Space, and all these people started to contact me because I started to post different articles about, how to be an entrepreneur, how to raise capital, all this stuff, how to be an entrepreneur, how to raise capital, all this stuff. And it just kept growing and growing. And then I started to have people from overseas contact us and say, could you set up Founder Space in our country? Or could you come over here and run programs for us? And so we started to do that. And now, like you mentioned, we have, over 50 partners in 22 countries. And last year when I could travel, this year I'm locked in my house, but last year I was traveling 70% of the time.
Wow, that's incredible. Are you planning on expanding into more countries in the near future? And if so, which ones?
Well, we're really strong right now in China. So we have our incubators all across China. We do a lot in South Korea. We do a lot in Taiwan. We do a lot in Australia. We're just setting up an incubator right now in Australia. So other places, we've done some in Singapore, but we want to do more. India is a big target for us.
If you're a startup founder, at what point should you join an accelerator? Like how would you determine whether or not an accelerator is right for you?
Well, it's not right for everybody. First of all, let me say that. So some startup founders just don't need it. So I would say if you've already done startups, you have a lot of experience, you have a big network here in Silicon Valley, you probably don't need a startup accelerator. There's no reason. You could just do it on your own. However, a lot of people that come to Founder Space and Y Combinator and other accelerators, a lot of them, it's their first time to do a startup. A lot of them didn't, they haven't been in Silicon Valley very long or at all. They're just coming, a lot of times from other parts of the country or overseas. For those people, it can be extremely valuable because it does what it says it does. It accelerates your business. Like it takes you, and if you don't have relationships here, suddenly it can be extremely valuable because it does what it says it does. It accelerates your business. Like it takes you, and if you don't have relationships here, suddenly we introduce you to all these people that you can have relationships with, from investors to the best lawyers, to marketing people, to all sorts of different people who can play a role in helping move your business forward. So that saves you a huge amount of time, and speed is so essential when doing a startup. And then there's funding, access to capital, raising capital. These things are really important for entrepreneurs, especially those who don't have a very deep network here. So that is the reason to join it. Now, let me say, not all businesses are right for startup accelerators. So there are those businesses that use new technology and are really pushing into new markets. They're really innovating. They tend to be a better fit for the type of investors we work with. If you're a more traditional business, like a restaurant, or you run, a consulting service or something like that, that's a more traditional, slow growth business, generally, we're not the best fit for you. You usually have to have some technology or something that will give you an extreme advantage over the competitors. If your only advantage is that you cook the best Thai food in the world, you're probably not going to be interesting to our type of investors.
Yeah, for sure. As startup founders, they are constantly faced with so many different struggles, like wearing all the hats, running lean with a small team. Would you say, are there unique struggles for the startups that come from overseas?
Yes. Well, first, the biggest one I mentioned is a network. They just don't know anybody. So they want to get up and running fast. And Silicon Valley is expensive, like so expensive to operate here, set up here, just get an apartment is expensive. So for these people, time and money, are equivalent. Like they just can't stay a long time. For overseas also, there's big barriers. Like a lot of them, they don't know how to pitch investors. They haven't done it before. At least they haven't done it here in the United States. So they might know in their home country, but it's very different here. What investors, their expectations, the information they need, and how you present it to them. Can you even articulate your business clearly when English isn't your first language? These are a lot of the challenges overseas entrepreneurs face. And right now, Founder Space is really, we get entrepreneurs from all over the world. So about a third of our entrepreneurs are from North America, Canada and the US. A third are from Europe, a third are from Asia, and 10% from everywhere else. That is kind of how it breaks down to what we're seeing. And we really special other incubators and accelerators is that we are very international. Not only do we go overseas and run all these programs, but we work with foreign governments and we work with a lot of overseas entrepreneurs, helping them get going here and kind of launch in Silicon Valley.
Do you think this will be a growing trend amongst other incubators and accelerators to be more global?
Yes, I think it's a natural trend. So right now, people don't realize this, but over 50% of the startup founders in Silicon Valley are not US born. They're from overseas. So if you look at the facts, and that's a huge number, it's over half and it's growing. So you think about it, Silicon Valley is a world innovation hub. That's what makes Silicon Valley so unique, is that we attract the best talent from all over the world. They all come here. They compete with each other, and the best survive and succeed. The best survive and succeed. Elon Musk is from South Africa. People are from all over the world. It's a magnet. And I think that's the reason we got into it. And I think it's only going to become more so in the coming decade.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of other trends, like since the startup ecosystem, it's constantly changing. What trends are you currently seeing, and what trends do you think will have the biggest impact in the near future?
The trends we are currently seeing, AI is huge, right? AI has it has affected almost every business on the planet to one degree or another. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, what sector you're in, AI is playing a role. So we've seen this huge thing over the past few years, and we're still very bullish on the potential of AI to dramatically transform industries. But looking out a little further, in areas where people usually don't look, your interfaces. And this is the area where you can actually, one of them is put chips into your brain, but that's really focused on a very narrow segment of the population, people who have serious medical problems. But for the vast majority of people, these non-invasive brain-computer interfaces are getting more and more sophisticated. So you can put on a headband, and it can actually start, I've worked with entrepreneurs on this. They can start to read your brain waves and interpret them, and you can command things like turn off and on the lights, move a PowerPoint, control a remote control car, basic things. But this is the first step in that direction.
Oh, wow.
Also, yeah, it's super exciting. Also very into gene editing with CRISPR. The potential is just enormous, for healthcare, for agriculture, for all these areas. Space technology has just boomed in the past, decade. It has gone from something that was kind of a wild-eyed dream to something that's really a robust ecosystem now. And I tell entrepreneurs, if you want to participate in kind of the space sector, space tech, we call it, you don't have to build a rocket ship like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. I mean, those guys, they have all the money in the world. You're not going to compete with them on that. If you think about the space industry, for every rocket ship, they need lots of different parts. They need software. They're going to be building habitats on the moon and Mars, satellites, all these different things are necessary for that industry, and you can actually specialize in one of those and become a multi-billion-dollar company. So that's very exciting. We're also, biotech is just blazing the way forward. There's so much going on with biotech. We love that sector. New health technologies in general. We're excited about financial technology. We've seen, the crypto technology. We've seen, the crypto boom with blockchain. I was never a huge cryptocurrency fanatic because, I thought most of them, not all, but most were just like gambling. They're way too risky. But blockchain is evolving, and over time, we're going to see more and more innovations, both not just in currency, but really across the board in how blockchain is applied. So there are a lot of new areas always emerging that are very exciting.
That's so true. It's crazy to think like all the things we've, imagined and seen in the movies, they're coming to life. And I'm just thinking you mentioned about the growing popularity of space tech and watching the cartoon. You remember the Jetsons?
Of course.
Yeah, it's it can definitely become a reality and not too long down the road. So just wanted to talk about since the start of the pandemic, have you seen any sorts of innovation strategies that have like quickly emerged just this changing their technologies to just kind of adapt to the current situation?
Well, to some degree, everybody's changed a little. You can't help it. All Google's employees are working at home. That's a huge change. So everybody's changing, but some businesses, especially startups that I work with that deal with offline businesses, they support restaurants or they support retail stores or things like this. They've been hit really hard. I mean, it is really tough for them. So they're having to rethink. I know a lot of people produce conferences, they've moved those all online. But a lot of times when you take something that's offline and just try to shoehorn it into online, it doesn't work too well. Like it's hard to make money. I mean, you can do it, but for a lot of the big conferences, they can't make the type of money they were making offline online, and they can't even get the type of attendance. So it's really tough. For restaurants, still very tough. A lot of them are doing takeout and things like that. Software company, I encourage companies to help the offline businesses, because I'm very disturbed right now by some of these apps that people use to buy restaurant food that charge so much money. Their premiums are so high that the restaurant themselves, they can't make a profit. It's like really, really hard when you're using these different apps to order. So there needs to be entrepreneurs out there who could address this, maybe create a free app like for restaurant, an open source one that all the restaurants can use so that they can keep their profits. Our startups that are working with retail, they have to change their business. A lot of times, these customers are pulling back, they're stopping spending. Some of them are shutting down. So everybody's pivoting. And what I tell these businesses is, if you're a startup that works with restaurants, let's say supplies a service to them, it could be an online service or something, right? But all of a sudden your revenue, your business has been really hard hit. The thing to do in a time like this is go back to your customers. You already have relationships with them. They know who you are, and start talking to them, figure out what problems they have, and see if you can help solve these problems for them. Because if you can solve problems for your existing customers, that's a whole new line of business potentially for you in the future.
And what about what's happening in other countries like China right now? Like, how will the pandemic affect startups and funding in the future?
The pandemic has already had a severe impact on China. I heard there are 80 million people unemployed there right now, huge number, but it's a big country. I mean, we have a lot of unemployment here too. And also, the startup, everybody gets conservative. So venture capitals have pulled back. They aren't investing as much. So it's really tough. On the entrepreneurs in China to actually get their next round of funding to move forward, even if their business is very solid. And a number of them I'm working with are like, they're making millions and millions of dollars and still having trouble raising capital in this market. So, but things in China are ahead of the US because, of course, COVID started earlier there, and they went into immediate action. And, most people now in China, they aren't afraid. They're out and about. They're, meeting people. They're going to work. They're still wearing masks, but business is back to normal. That doesn't mean COVID can't come back. There's been some cases, flare-ups across China and South Korea, and it may come back. So things may revert. We just don't know yet. But things are very uncertain. I will put it that way. They're uncertain around the world.
So, do you think that once the pandemic is over, do you think that investors will be even more selective on what types of startups they invest in and favor more verticals than others?
I do. So I fundamentally believe that, well, I always believe investors are very selective. And in hard times, they get even more selective because there are more startups that need money and they can pick and choose. Now, we've seen right now, both in the stock market and in the tech sector, that high technology startups that are providing value online have really weathered the storm fairly well. Especially if they're not totally reliant on offline customers. If their customer base is very broad, those companies are still doing well. They're still getting funded. I just made an investment this week in a company that's doing that. And I feel like it's a very, that trend will continue. I see SaaS-based software as a service as still going strong. I see fundamentally AI startups as being very valuable in the future. I see lots of new innovation coming. I don't, what I tell entrepreneurs is, don't just focus on the virus. If you're trying to remake your whole business just for the virus, that's not a good reason, because this will pass. And honestly, I know a lot of startups who are rolling out services just targeted for the time while people are in their homes, are quarantined in their homes. But these services won't be meaningful. A lot of them won't be meaningful after this ends. So they'll have no business. They will just have business right now, but not later. And it may take them a long time to make all these changes, Iris. You should use this downtime to actually innovate. How can you be better than your competitors in your core business? What can you do to improve? What new software can you develop or use to make your company more efficient and offer better value to your customers? These are things that startups should be doing now, instead of just panicking and trying to remake their whole business. Now, if your business wasn't doing well before COVID, this is a good time to start over, to totally pivot into something else. But honestly, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. There's still a lot of, the market will rebound. Things will return to normal. It is just a matter of time.
Mm-hmm. So it's really important to focus on trying not to be too reactive, but more proactive and focusing on the long term.
Yes. And hopefully you have the financing to do that. If you don't, as an entrepreneur, take on temp work, take on whatever you need to pay the bills during this difficult time. But keep in mind, your strategy should be long-term. It shouldn't be short-term, because the short-term will change very fast and the needs will change very fast. The shortages of ventilators, the shortages of masks. Soon, those will be addressed. Now, if you were in a position to provide those because you had, all the capabilities of doing so, that's great. You should do that. But if you didn't really have the capability to provide them and you were just beginning on it, that wasn't probably a smart move, because by the time you figure it all out, they won't need the ventilators, and there will be enough masks. You can't start from ground zero and actually compete with companies that have been doing this a while.
Yeah, definitely. You're a very energetic guy, so I'm curious to know, how are you staying motivated during these unprecedented times?
Well, ironically, I've never been busier. I'm always busy, but I'm doing I'm practicing what I preach. So I tell startups, look to the future, figure out, we've been hard hit. Our incubators all closed. They're just reopening now in China. It's just happening, but everywhere else, we've been hard hit. But I used all this time. I had a huge list of things I wanted to get to actually work on. And I've been using this time to do all that work. So I just finished a new book. So, my previous books, I have 2 books out there, and I just finished a 3rd one right now. I also, we totally upgraded our online program, so that, because we already had it, thousands of entrepreneurs around the world were already using our online program. So we upgraded it with all new content and everything else. We're launching a new online innovation program. I can't even get through all the things on my plate.
Yeah, that's crazy that you finished a 3rd book. Actually, speaking of books, you're the author of several award-winning books, such as Make Elephants Fly and Surviving a Startup. Could you give a brief synopsis of each book and what startups could learn from them?
Sure, I would be more than happy to do so. So Make Elephants Fly is all about how you take your big idea. That big idea is the elephant, right? And it's so big, you can't even imagine it flying, ever getting off the ground. And it shows you, step by step, how to make it fly, how to launch a big idea. So it's all about the innovation process. How do you innovate? How do the top startups innovate? What did I learn working with hundreds of entrepreneurs around the world about all the mistakes they make and what they do right? It's all in that book. And then my other book, that's published by Hachette worldwide. And the next book, Surviving a Startup, is published by HarperCollins. It isn't out yet. It's coming out very soon, but you can read about it on our site. And that is about everything you need to do to survive. Like I've been through it. I've been through it. I did 3 venture funded startups. I know how tough it is. It's crazy, especially now. So it's all about that. And that'll be out soon. And then my third book that I just finished is all about the future. So I haven't announced it yet, but it's all about new technologies and how they'll transform our lives, the workplace, and what will happen in the next 10 or 20 years.
Oh, that sounds really exciting. Can't wait till when it comes out. Do you know when it will be coming out? Do you have an idea?
So the HarperCollins book will be coming out early next year. So it takes them a while. They're a publishing house. It's all done. And then the new book, I don't know, probably next year too. So I had this time, I completed it. But if you want information and you want to want to watch videos or educational material, we have a lot of it on founderspace.com. You just go there and it's all there.
So in addition to writing books, I read in one of your interviews that you consume a lot of audiobooks. So what was the last audiobook you read? You listened to.
Yeah. No, I go through, well, before COVID, I was going through 1 audiobook a week. Now I'm going through 2, just to show you. I have a little extra time. And, I'm a fanatic about audiobooks. So right now I'm reading, I love this author. His name is Bill Bryson. And the book is called The Body. It's everything about the human body you never wanted to know. Like all that, like how we're mostly made of microbes and, all these crazy things about the human body, what how our brain works and all this stuff. He's a wonderful writer. All his books are great. So I've read tons of his books. Bill Bryson. I just reread William Gibson's Neuromancer. So that's a classic in sci-fi. And I literally read all types of books. So I'm totally into technology books. Naturally, I have to keep up on that, and innovation books, but I'm also into history books. I'm into great literature. Like I read all the classics, and I try to read a diverse portfolio of books as possible because it helps me think in different ways and really helps me myself innovate and help entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm. I'm the same way. I like to think of myself as one of those multi-passionate people. Like I don't just like one thing. I'm like this, and this.
Yeah, that's exactly how I am. I'm into the arts. I'm into I'm into anything that's interesting because that's why I love the job I do now. Because right now, I'm so lucky I get to meet people like you who are fascinating and have these great conversations. I get to travel around the world and work with really smart scientists and entrepreneurs and figure out I'm learning a lot of times more than they're teaching me because they're an expert on a certain subject. Like I've been working with this great entrepreneur in Israel who's developing this AI technology for reading faces. And he's teaching me so much about this technology that I didn't even think was possible.
Very cool. So I'd like to talk about the F word that a lot of entrepreneurs go through, failure. Why do you think some entrepreneurs fail while others succeed, and which qualities would you say define them?
So I have 3 qualities that make up a great CEO for an entrepreneur, to be an entrepreneur. If you're going to be CEO, if you're not going to be CEO, you honestly don't need these because the CEO is really the one who makes or breaks the company in the early stage. If the CEO isn't great, the company almost never executes because first of all, the CEO, they have to get a great team, right? So one person can never do it alone. So a really important trait for any entrepreneur, if you're going to be CEO, is leadership. If you cannot get other people to follow you, it is going to be really hard to get your company off the ground. Because first of all, the first job of a CEO is really to go out and get other co-founders. Without them, you can't build anything. You need to get started. And how do you get people who are amazing, who could go to work for Google or Microsoft or any big company in the world, but they decide to work for your startup, this little startup with this idea that is, probably going to fail? Why do they do that? That is great leadership. If you can convince them for no money to come work for you, then I can kind of see you have that quality. Also, great leadership means you can get investors to invest. You can go out and get customers to believe in your product. You can get the press, the attention of the media. Leadership is number one. Number two, I look for is curiosity, because we're looking for innovative startups that are discovering new things. So I like leaders who are very curious, always asking questions, always analyzing, taking apart stuff, trying to figure it out, because they're going to go deeper than other people, and they're going to figure out what's coming next. And then the third and final one is pure and utter stamina, the ability to just keep going, especially when things get hard, like right now. Like, can you keep going? If you give up easily, it's going to be very hard for you to be an entrepreneur. If you can't handle stress, it's going to be very hard for you to continue as an entrepreneur. You have to have that quality too. So these three qualities combined make an ideal entrepreneur CEO.
As a serial entrepreneur, can you share some of your personal failures and how you overcame them?
Well, there are too many to share.
Can you name 3?
Yeah, I can name a lot. I always say, if you're actually pushing any sort of limits, like pushing the edge of a new technology or a new business model or anything, failure is intrinsic in the process. You're going to fail. So I failed many, many times. In the game industry where I first started, my very first startup, we came out of the gate in the very early days of the internet. So we launched a company, and we had was my two partners. One of them was brilliant at design, like user interface design. The other one was a brilliant engineer, and he had built a massively multi-user gaming server. It was like one of the first ones ever built. He's like right on the cutting edge. And so we go to market with this gaming server, but it's a technology in search of a problem. We didn't really have a market. We just had the server. We knew we could create some games maybe, but we tried to decide. So the first business we tried didn't work. We actually thought we would get game developers to come on our server, and we would host them. It would be a platform for all these game developers. But in the early days, this is way before Steam, way before anything, World of Warcraft, anything. So it was the very early days. Game developers didn't want to, they wanted to build it themselves. A lot of them said, no, we want to build it ourselves. And, they weren't used to using other startups' technology. It was too early. Then there were those game developers who came on board, but they didn't want to give us much revenue share. And they demanded a lot of changes and a lot of customization. After 2 months of this, we called it quits. We were like, this is not going to work. We're not going to scale this business. Then we hit upon a new idea. Oh, we'll create our own game. We'll call it Jabber Chat, and it will be a game you can play online as you chat with people. And we made one of the very first JavaScript embeds. So you could actually embed this chat game on any website. Anybody could cut and paste the code. This was like pushing the limits, right? And that went crazy. We had like over 100 different websites which adopted ours. We had traffic was going up and up and up. Then we won the best interactive application at South by Southwest conference. We were on top of the world. But when we looked at the revenue numbers, we had embedded advertising. At the end of a month, we only had enough money to buy one pizza.
Aww.
Buy a pizza. It was because it was so early in the .com days, so early. There was no ad revenue. Nobody clicked on banner ads. And if they clicked on them, you didn't get paid anything. So it was just like Google AdWords wasn't out. None of these things were out, right? It was really, really, really early. So there's no way to monetize this. And we were running out of money because we'd already pivoted once. So they're failure number 2. And then the third time, we were like, oh my God, we're desperate now. And we pivoted again. And this time we heard that MTV was looking to do an interactive TV game show. And we were like, oh boy, okay, interactive TV, that sounds promising. And MTV's a big company. They're part of Viacom. So we kept calling them on the phone and saying, we have your technology. We didn't really have it. We only had the game server, not the synchronous to television, but we figured we could build that. So we're like, we have your technology. We have your technology. They never called us back. Never. My partner, the designer, she got invited to speak on a panel at CES. So she gets on the panel. And she starts talking about what we're doing. Like, we're going to be what we supposedly want to do with MTV, but they won't return our calls. So she starts talking about how we're going to synchronize television with broadcast, and we have this whole technology and blah, 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 blah. And after she's done with the talk, this guy comes running up from the audience, and he was like, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you. I am the vice president of MTV Interactive, and we need your technology. And she goes, I know, we've been leaving messages on your voicemail this past month. And literally within 2 weeks, we had the deal closed. We had hundreds of thousands of dollars advanced to us, and we were on our way. So it took a couple of false starts, but we got going. But life is full of these things. This is what doing a startup is.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. So who are some startup founders that you admire and why? If you could name a few.
There's so many amazing startup founders that I admire. So I love Larry Page and Sergey Brin, not just because they're brilliant and because I believe they really want to do good in the world. They're not just out to make money. They really want to better humanity, but also because they're humble. Like, when Larry Page and Sergey Brin started, they recognized that they weren't ideal people to be the CEO. And even though it was their company, they stepped aside and brought in Eric Schmidt. And that's really the combination is what made Google what it is today. And even now, Larry stepped back into the CEO role and stepped out of it again because he really isn't either of those guys. They're really nerdy, amazing technologists who are passionate for what technology can do. They don't have the other skill sets as much as other people do. And they're very smart about recognizing that, which a lot of people just aren't. They feel like they have to be the CEO. And so I admire them for that. In a different way, and not being humble at all, I admire Elon Musk. He's the opposite of humble. He thinks he can do everything, including take humanity to Mars. He's the complete opposite of those guys. But at the same time, just like them, he's a visionary, and he has the skills to be the CEO. Like he has the skill sets in abundance that I described. He never gives up. He's always right now he's complaining about his factories being shut down. Like he just never stops, right? He'll just do whatever it takes, even if it sounds crazy. He'll push and push and push. So that's another type of entrepreneur I really admire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to looking for people who have different skill sets because that's what, as you said, that's what makes the company successful. And I'm just thinking of my own experience being the co-founder of a social enterprise that both my co-founder and I, we could technically do all the roles, but we've decided, that she'll do some of these because these are more her strength and this is what she's more passionate. And then I'm more passionate about this particular side of the business. So it works out well finding people who are very different, but you balance each other out.
I think that's so important to find complementary people. And I tell entrepreneurs, don't worry about your idea. Don't worry about building the technology. Worry about finding the right people. Like if you find the right people, there's a million problems in the world that need to be solved. And you guys can go out and figure out which ones are the best opportunities. But the hard part is finding the people.
Yeah, I agree. So my final question for you is, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, well, I would give one big piece of advice. So I tend to get, anxious, like a lot of people do. I would tell myself, just don't worry so much. Don't sweat it. Like my companies ran into difficulty. I had all this trouble. It caused lots of anxiety at different points in my life. So I can definitely empathize with entrepreneurs going through this. That's the good thing. But the bad thing is that I had to suffer through it myself. And what I know now is I tell myself, and this is, if you look back at a problem you had a year ago, you can hardly remember what bothered you a year ago, a day from now, day to day. You can hardly remember all those problems. So the problem you're having today that is really driving you crazy, you probably won't even remember it a year from now, maybe not even 6 months from now. And you probably won't even care about it even 3 months later. So a lot of times we make these problems bigger than they have to be. And that doesn't help us solve them. It actually drains our energy and tends to push us into making the wrong decisions. So that is the advice I would give myself. Don't sweat those things. Even if it seems like the worst disaster in the world, it's really not.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that.
Then you know what I mean. You're like me.
So thank you so much for being on the show. I really loved your energy and enthusiasm.
Thank you. You're a wonderful host.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and stay tuned for more episodes. Ciao for now. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Bacon Bits and Bites podcast. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, and share this podcast with your family and friends. You can follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Bacon Bits and Bites. And on Twitter, it's baconbits_bites. Ciao for now.